I'd like to call to order the June 5th, 2020 special meeting of the Frankfurt Plant Board. This meeting is being conducted in accordance with the Governor's executive order during the pandemic in terms of an open meeting. The meeting today just consists of the board members and the general manager and David Denton, Vint Foster. So we're in accordance with less than 10 people here in the room. So at this point, Kathy, would you call the roll?
Member Snyder?
Here.
Member Hale?
Here.
Member Mason?
Here.
Member Cubine?
Here. We have a quorum. We're constituted to do business. First item on the agenda is the approval of minutes from the May 19th board meeting. I think everybody should have them. Does anybody have any revisions, changes, corrections? If not, do I have a motion?
So moved.
I'll second.
Second, any discussion? If not, everybody in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No? Minutes adopted. Next item, in this part of the meeting, there'll be no vote taken. This is a work session on the proposed plant board budget for fiscal 2021. Mr. Denton provided the material some time ago for staff to review the draft, and I think everybody's had an opportunity to either communicate comments or questions or get anything clarified with Mr. Denton. The way, if it's all right with everybody, we're going to proceed is we're going to try to end today about 1:15, and I'm going to, at 1 o'clock, we'll go into closed session for a matter. So at this point, we'll take about a half hour for each area and ask David or Vint or Gary to give us about a 10-minute opening on each area, then about 20 minutes or so of Q&A, see if we got kind of a consensus where we're at or whatever, then go on to the next area, any revisions, changes. And at the end of today's meeting, if we're in agreement in general with where we are, fine. If not, we can have another special meeting. And if we're in general agreement, then we can just wrap it up at the regular board meeting later this month. So at this point, Gary, if it's all right with you, I'll turn it over to Mr. Denton for a fascinating presentation. Yes. Mr. Denton?
All right. First of all, thank you, board, for the opportunity to present this to you today. Just to go ahead and set the table for those that might be watching, just a little some housekeeping. That the Frankfurt Plant Board is a nonprofit, public, diversified municipal utility. We operate as an independent entity under the provisions of Kentucky Revised Statutes 96.172 through 96.188. FPB is also considered a special purpose governmental entity, an SPGE, per the Kentucky Revised Statute Chapter 65, and is subject to the registration, reporting, and procedures contained therein. FPB has a fiscal year that ends on June 30th of any given year. What we have before you today is the budget and financial plan for the fiscal years 21 through 25. So what we're asking for is at the next regular board meeting in June will be for the board to approve the budget for fiscal year 2021, ending in June 30th, 2021. So we have, like I said, 5 years here, but we'll be focusing primarily on the 2021 budget as we walk through the numbers today. I'd like to just talk briefly about the structure of the budget. I'll go ahead and turn over here to page 5. You can see on page 5 and 6 that we have a list of budget assumptions that were used to put together the revenue and expense portions of the budget. We did not include every single possible assumption, as that could get very lengthy, but the ones that we have provided in the packet are those that have the most impact, specifically on the revenue side and also wholesale power and our benefits and payroll. The budget in general does not have a general inflation factor year over year. We just have found that by the time you get to year 5, the numbers are way out of bounds. So we have provided all these different assumptions for you that I'll be glad to walk through as we go through the budget. I'd like to go talk about each section. So for each division, electric, water, telecom, and also for the administrative sections, we have a line item detail in the budget that is essentially, it's an itemized list of all items that make up revenue, all items that make up expenses. If you were to take that report and roll it up into each of the revenue and expense categories, it would tie right back to the statement of revenue, expenses, and change in net position for the electric and water and telecom divisions. And it did roll right back up into the statement of expenses for our administrative budgets. For electric and water telecom, we then have our funding summaries, which is a big picture of everything that occurred during the year. It shows our statement of revenue, expenses, and change in net position based on the accrual basis. And then we walk through items that hit the balance sheet and affect cash. So we go from an accrual-based statement to a cash-based statement that gets us back to what our estimated cash reserves are going to be for any given year. So it's okay, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to just start by walking through probably the one single page, if you were looking at just one page of this budget, that I'd like to talk about. It would be on page 7. This is the company-wide funding summary. So I'll walk through this funding.
Can I ask a
Yes,
quick
ma'am.
question before you just move on? I was just curious on, wait a minute. On this page 5, the assumptions for electric
Yes, ma'am.
are the same throughout the whole 5 years. Is that just because there are no rate increases expected during that time?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
So we have shown, if you look, that's something worth pointing out as we go through the company-wide budget. In this 5-year plan, we have no proposed rate changes for our electric service. In fiscal year 2021, there are no planned changes for water revenue. We do see those estimated in years 22 and 23, but for this next year, we do not have any changes in water rates. And then on the telecommunications section, we have many different services having a full service network. No service, with the exception of cable TV, has a rate increase over the 5 years. Cable TV, we've done to try to educate our customers on the amount of programming expenses that FPB receives. Every time we renew a contract, there's rate increases usually baked in, and we pass those along to customers as well. But so good news, for 2021, no rate changes expected with the exception of cable TV in this proposed budget.
Thanks.
You're welcome. So looking at page 7, so lines 10 through 100 or 105 are being brought over from the, let's say, income statement of revenue, expenses, and change net position for the whole company. You can see operating revenues on line 10 of just at approximately $98.8 million, with other revenues on line 15 of just over 1.4, bringing total revenue proposed for fiscal year 2021 to just over $100.2 million. From there, we look at our divisional expenses. These are directly related to the divisions and that they represent, of just under $64 million against division admin expenses of just over 13.1. You get to your gross margin at this point, just over $23.4 million. It's always very important that your revenue is set high enough to cover direct expenses to provide the service to our customers, so we're good at this point. Looking at lines 40 through 95, these are our administrative overhead expenses attributable to each of our administrative departments. And you can see those total on line 100 of just over $12.3 million, bringing on line 105 your revenue minus all of your expenses at $11.1 million for the period. So this, I just summarized the statement of revenue, expense, and change in net position for all the company. And if you were to add each of those up, they'd all tie back to these numbers here. So that was based on income statement, and now we switch over to items that are non-cash items in the income statement that we add back, or items that are affecting the balance sheet, such as debt service, principal payments. Then we get back to a cash balance. So looking at line 115, we're going to take to our net position, add back our depreciation expense of estimated to be just over $7.6 million. And then when we get into lines 140 through 165 are the principal payments on our long-term debt. The interest expense is recorded over in the income statement, and in this section you can see the principal payments being made on these on this debt. So after we show the principal payments, you get to line 180, a total cash funding for the current year at just over $14.7 million. We add back to that our beginning cash balance on line 185, approximately $42 million, bringing cash available for capital additions to just over $56.8 million. They can see on lines 195 through 230, these are all the capital additions for the each of the 3 divisions and our administrative departments. Line 195, estimated capital additions from electric, water, telecom at just over $17.4 million. And then our administrative departments there for IT, safety, and support services, totaling line 235, just under $442,000. So you'll see on line 240, after we go through the income being generated in current year, add back non-cash items and other items affecting the balance sheet, bring back in our prior year, beginning year balance, and you can see we have an estimated cash reserve at just over $38.9 million estimated when we get to June 30, 2021. At the very bottom of the page, it's worth noting we have certain reserve requirements that we must maintain on line 245 through 275. These are cash that is restricted per our either a bond covenant or debt covenant that we must maintain. Those amounts are non-negotiable, must have that cash available, which we do. And so what we bring to line 280 there is you add all of those individual requirements and covenants, you have to, at a minimum, maintain an $8.8 million cash reserve. When we look at what we really need as a company, on line 285, what we're presenting there is showing when we're recommending to you as the board that we would need to maintain approximately a $43 million cash reserve for us to feel like we're in a good financial position and have a strong reserve that can help us get through hard times, which is a perfect example of what we've been through in the last 60 days. So also to maintain a good bond rating, which is a very important if you need to go out for additional long-term debt, which we are not expected to issue in this 5-year plan, but it's always a good idea to keep those reserves at estimated levels. So that's pretty much, when we go through all 5 years, you can see where we stand. It's approximately year 3 before we get to our estimated recommended minimum cash reserve level, but then from there seem to be hitting that target just fine. When we look at the company overall, are there any questions through this point of the budget that you'd like to?
Could I maybe ask just kind of 3 real general questions? In putting together the budget and proposed expenses, revenues, what was your general revenue assumptions in terms of what you based projected revenue on? You know, since we're not proposing any rate increases, then generally what was your assumptions on salaries, health insurance, pensions, and what's the budget that we're looking at, what's proposed for 21 compared to both budgeted 21 and actual 20 and budgeted 20? Okay.
So let me start with the revenue assumptions. Let's look starting with electric first. So this is people, I can think of customers that might be watching this meeting. You know, if you look at your bill, primarily when we look at what is on your bill and what is produced in revenue when customers pay their bill, we're billing for the amount of energy used, the kilowatt hours used per month, and there's an energy customer service charge as well for each customer type. So what we do is look at an estimated kilowatt hour energy sales that our customers would want to purchase from FPB. We'd look at also how many different customers we have for each class, because that's coming from the customer service charge. And that gets us back to our estimated revenue figure that we'll have for revenue for electric. For water, it's the same thing. When you look at your bill, there is a customer charge based on the size of the meter that services your home or business. And then we look at the amount of gallons that are going to be sold. Those are in units of 1,000 gallons each. And we estimate, based on the current usage, number of customers, what that gets us to in revenue. In telecom, it is actually, you're looking at it more on a per customer number, because those customers pay for each cable TV, internet, security, any other service they might purchase in our telecom division based on a per month charge. So we're estimating what's that demand going to be for each service, and that gets us back to a revenue figure. So whenever we're looking at the budget, something important I think for our customers to understand is, you know, what goes into setting rates for utility. There's really 4 main pieces. So we have to be able to set revenue high enough to cover our operating and administrative expenses that we were paying on a day-to-day basis, to be able to pay employees and to pay all of the different expenses we need to function on a day-to-day basis. The next is cash is needed to pay down debt service. So we have certain FPB issues debt usually for projects that are very expensive and are long-term projects. Like I said, we do not estimate any new long-term debt issuances for this 5-year plan. But that is one of the pieces. We must have enough money to pay for debt service that we've committed to. The next piece is capital infrastructure investment. A utility, the single largest asset we have is the amount of infrastructure to maintain and provide service to our customers. So we have to have enough money to invest back into infrastructure to maintain reliable service to our customers. And then the last of the 4 pieces, when you're looking at setting rates, is the importance of maintaining enough of a margin there to have cash reserves available for in case there is anything that might arise that we need to get through a rough patch financially, and also to maintain credible bond rating so that if we were to go out for additional funding at some point, we would be able to get a favorable rate. So those are the different things in looking at setting rates and the assumptions that we have in this budget for electric, water, telecom. Let's look for a moment on page 5 at the top when we talk about payroll and benefits. So in this budget, FPB board back in 2014 approved a compensation plan that FPB goes by year over year and also budgets for year over year. So I'm looking at the very top of the wage increases for employees. Each employee has a grade for their job, and in that job, it goes through a different pay range, with a minimum, mid, point, and maximum of the pay grade. So per our compensation plan, for employees that are below the midpoint of their grade, they receive a 2% raise on July 1 of each fiscal year and on January 1 of each fiscal year. And that is baked into all 5 years of this budget. For employees that are above the midpoint, so they have hit and surpassed the midpoint of their pay grade, per our compensation policy, or we set a cost of living adjustment that is in line with the consumer price index at the time of budget setting. So in this budget, we've allowed for a 1% cost of living adjustment for fiscal year 21, 22, and then assuming inflation would rise as we get past some of the recent economic situations we're in, and we do 2% years 3 through 5. On health insurance, FPB is a self-funded insurance plan. So you have, out of the $2.5 million we've budgeted for the whole year, about $500,000 of that is for fixed expenses, items that are included and have to be paid regardless. The other 80% of the $2.5 million are for claims for our FPB members, or I should say, members of the FPB health insurance plan, I should say. I believe we had a question. The board did submit questions to me over the last couple of weeks, and I've responded back to answers in those. And we talk about healthcare in a few of those questions, and kind of gave some of the drivers that are pushing that number. I think there's a chart that I provided as well that show back over the last decade. We've essentially, FPB has hung around the $2.5 million healthcare actual expenses for almost a decade. Some of that is because we have asked our FPB employees to pay more in the form of premiums, and some is also good decisions that have been made by the board and staff to keep healthcare costs in check in the plan. We provide a whole list of things over the years that the board and staff have done to keep costs in check. So that is what health insurance looks like.
Can I ask you one question on the salaries?
Yes, sir.
I know Diane looked at, and part of that, so if the board wants to deviate from that salary that in the past what's been used, then that's something we need, and that will ripple through the entire budget, right?
It will.
And
Yes.
so I know you all have looked at both city, county, school boards, to the best KU, what some of them are doing, state government, and kind of a preliminary look at what COLA might look, cost of living, inflation might look like for this year, although we're just 5 months in.
Right.
Is that correct?
Yes, and with the CPI, we usually look back over the 12 months for any given period. So what was the last 12 months as of April, for
Okay.
example. But yes, we've gone through all those. The board's been given some comparable information. But if the board would want to do something different than the compensation plan, we definitely would need to be directed to do that, since the plan is set in our governing documents on
Okay.
the compensation. You see, we have life insurance budgeted. I think our each FPB employee is allowed a certain amount of life insurance up to 2 times their pay. I think it's a maximum of $250,000. So that is something that's provided and included in the budget. Frankfurt Plant Board is a member of the Kentucky Retirement System under the County Employment Retirement System. So whenever we pay employees their credible compensation amount that is paid them, we must pay the employer matching percentage. For 2021, that is 24.06%. That is same as fiscal year 20. I think for legislators passed a 1-year freeze on the employer contribution, so that is the same as the current year we're in. We also, in this current fiscal year, I believe it was back around January, December, January, we also have a 401A plan for our Tier 3 employees that we've included in this budget. You can see the amount of KRS and 401A match is estimated to be just under $3.5 million. The 401A match portion is around $28,000, just to give you an idea of the break there between the two. So majority of it, $3.44 million, is going to be the CERS contribution. We include there the next line, Social Security Medicare. That's your 7.65% that the plant board must pay for all employees' wages. And then we also are self-funded through Kentucky League of Cities Unemployment Trust. We have budgeted $26,000 in premiums that we'll pay in for that.
And how does this budget compare, budget versus actual versus
So
for
if you look
2021?
at the current year budget, fiscal year 20, that ends June 30, 2020, versus what we have budgeted for you, proposed for fiscal year 2021, we're actually $1.9 million below prior year's budget. So that's just over 2% decrease in the fiscal year 20 to 21 budget. When you look at our estimated actual current year budget, fiscal year 20 compared to estimated actual, we're trending just around $3 million below budget, about 3.5% below. And each of those items that we're below, majority of that amount, 78% or so, is in our electric division. And that's primarily due to a change in wholesale power estimates from budget to actual for 2020. So that's kind of a good summary of where we are. It's worth noting this budget is $1.9 million below the current year budget that we're in. We're actually showing one of the 4 pieces of setting rates is debt service. We're actually going to be almost $550,000 in less in debt service in fiscal year 21 than in 20. We have some projects that were included last year that we hope to continue to fund and get done as far as capital. And then you can see that we're moving in a good direction with our cash reserves over the 5-year plan. So that's a kind of a good summary of the overall budget.
Okay, let me open it up to everybody here. Steve?
Yeah. You talked about the the ratings for bond agencies. What is the optimum percentage about the bond rating organizations want you to hold?
Yes, sir.
And where are we
So
in this budget?
as we are right now, when you look on page 7 here, this is the company-wide, rolling the whole company up together. Line 285, the very last line. That number is based on 120 days cash on hand.
Mm-hmm.
That is typically, you hear 120 as the number that is a good goal to shoot for, and it seems to be moving upward. When you look at bond rating agencies.
What was that percent again? I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
120 days cash on hand, so it's 120, basically you would be able to fund 3 months of expenses with your cash on hand is the goal. So today where we sit, like at this moment, we have 180 days cash on hand, which is 180 days is kind of the gold plate platinum number that you're looking for.
But 120 is what they require.
Well, there's not really a set requirement. It is that there is guidance, and you know that you need to maintain a healthy days cash on hand number. Okay. And the 120 days cash on hand is usually the number that most agencies look at. It's kind of best practices. Anything above 120, you're starting to get, it's just much better for you and your potential rating. FPB has a rating for Standard & Poor's, and we have an A rating. A stable rating. If we were to maintain the existing 180 days cash on hand, I could see that number possibly, that rating actually increasing if we
Okay.
continue that level.
Okay, two more questions, John, if I could. One, we're not proposing to do any debt, get into any more additional debt in the next fiscal year. That's what you said.
Correct.
So then the third question is just fundamentally on what you went through on the company-wide funding summary.
Yes, sir.
The division expenses, line 25, and division administrative expenses 30, those numbers in essence is the budget. Is that correct?
It would be those two numbers plus the
The debt
total
service.
in line 100.
Line 1.
So your budgeted expense items, whenever there's two different, looking at this on the expense budget versus capital budget.
Mhm.
Expense budget flows through the income statement. Capital budget is on the balance sheet side. So if you added together lines 25, 30, and 100, that would be the expense budget.
Okay, so theoretically, if any of those numbers that comprise those numbers were reduced, then your recommended cash reserve would go up.
As long as you maintain the same estimated revenue, yes.
Yeah, so there's a direct correlation between those two.
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
We've talked about long-term debt issuance, so I want to be clear, this is something that, because we have, when you're looking through the three main lines of business, you look at our electric division, you'll notice that the savings in wholesale power have contributed to an elevated savings and an elevated cash balance when it comes to our electric division. There are two large projects that in our water division that we would like to do. One of them is the reservoir project, which I think we all agree is not negotiable. It has to be done. The other is AMI for the water division. Instead of going out and borrowing from a third party, we would like to propose using some internal cash reserves to fund those two projects. There'll be a significant interest savings to the company and also some administrative items that we can avoid, and overall it's just better for the business. FPB's policy when it comes to investments, we're a public agency, so we're really handcuffed as to type of investments we can enter into. Primarily, we're looking for safety and liquidity and maintaining your cash. If we were to use those funds, just have them in a savings account right now, very low. We're looking at 0.5%. If we were to use those funds internally, you're looking at saving 2% on interest rate. So you can see where the value would come there. So when I mentioned issuing long-term debt, we will not go out to a third party in the proposed budget, but use cash on hand to fund those, bring savings back to the company, to our customer owners, and accomplish some very much needed infrastructure projects. That's kind of a summary of
Okay, John had
yes, sir.
A couple of questions, if you don't mind. Number one, the retirement contribution that you discussed and mentioned, that number encompasses tier one, all the tiers of on CERS, correct?
Yes, sir.
That's all lumped in together, right?
Yes, sir.
What's our breakout in terms of the percentages we have that are in each tier?
I
You-
have that
you aware
for
of that?
you. I have that for you. I can actually find it in my computer. I don't have it right off
It's okay.
my head,
I
but
just-
I do know when we approved the 401A plan, we talked about, it was
Yeah.
around 2025 that we would
Mhm.
have more tier 3.
Right,
Tier
that
one
was
and two.
when it was gonna flip, so I
Right.
was just wondering where we were right this very minute, so.
But
okay.
I have that I can shoot
Okay,
out to everyone.
great.
Maybe when we take a little break here in a few minutes, maybe
Sure.
if you find it in your computer, you let John know.
Absolutely.
Sure, absolutely. And I think, and the other question I was gonna ask about self-funding and AMI, so I think you covered what I was gonna ask, so,
Okay.
thank you.
And it jumps a little bit ahead, but this budget includes continuing the AMI project
Yes, sir.
and includes continuing to proceed with fiber to the home, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
So we've got, each division has a very, it's a large, on the scale of work and also funding needed. AMI for the electric and water division, water reservoir for the water division, and then continued reinvestment into our telecommunications network to be able to provide our 21st century communications to our community. All those are included in here.
Mr. Chairman, David, do you mind the updated the board like two things? One is what's the revenue estimate compared last year, this year, water, electric?
Mhm.
And another thing is about the proposed budget. There's some customer rebate there too, right?
Yes, sir.
But it's board approved, but it's just the money there. David, go ahead. Sorry.
So I
Do you want David to answer that first, or Dawn, did you have a question you wanted to get
Well,
first?
I was just I'm on page 5 of the supplemental
Okay.
budget information. And so, if I'm reading that correctly, so in the approximately 1.9 million, decrease in the expense budget, or 2% for this year compared to last, budget year,
Yes, ma'am.
is basically attributable then to the 10.5% reduction in wholesale power due to us being part of KYMEA instead of KU.
That is by far the biggest driver when you look at budget to actual year over year. From the fiscal year 20 budget to the current proposed 21 budget, it's a $4.6 million decrease in wholesale power. That's two different things going on with that. One is we actually have had a true rate reduction from KYMEA. The KYMEA Board of Directors in April, their April meeting 2020, approved a rate decrease to members of KYMEA, which FPB is. If you were to, when we're talking about comparing rates to rates, it's important, are you comparing apples to apples or apples to something else? You need to, when you look at the same billing units, if you were to say the rates compared to the exact same demand, energy, and transmission rates from 2020 to 2021, exact same billing units, throw the rates together, compare them, you're about a 2% decrease, rate decrease. Now, when you consider in this budget, and I think what Gary is kind of alluding to when it comes to electric, we are estimating a decrease in demand and energy sales in 21 compared to this year due to the COVID-19 issue and economic slowdown that could occur. Hopefully, we've overestimated that decrease, but we just felt like it was appropriate to put something to recognize that this is not a normal, starting off in a normal year.
More conservative stance.
Yes. So for the decrease is a true rate reduction from KYMEA and also a estimated decrease in energy and demand cost due to economic slowdown. We estimated that a decrease of 5% for both. But that is the main driver, Ms. Hale, of the $1.9 million savings year over year.
Thank you.
And you want to address what Gary brought up in terms of what in this budget was proposed in terms of some type of customer rebate or return or whatever?
So due to the savings that we have and estimating to have through KYMEA and our wholesale power, we would have proposed in this budget another $1.6 million rebate back to our customers. This is similar to electric customers. Electric customers would receive a portion of that similar to we did in August of 2019.
How's 1.6 compared to last year?
It's the same amount, same dollar amount.
And what was the average that customers got then?
The average resident, stick with residential customers, because that's pretty easy to compare, is around $30 for an individual, for an average usage residential customer. And it does, of course, will adjust and be different for each customer based on their usage for a prior period.
And then for the industrials and commercial, it'd be significantly more, right?
Correct. Yep. If you pay more, then you would receive more of a
It's the
rebate.
same percentage,
Right.
whether you're residential, industrial,
Right.
whatever, but since they're using it
Right.
significantly more, dollars wise, it's more, but the same percentage. Everyone, I guess you could say it's fairly given them.
Yeah.
So due to the fact that we are saving on wholesale power, that's the primary reason we're able to keep rates flat in electric over this 5-year plan and also give back, just in year 21 is the electric rebate assumed. On our water, looking at the water side of things, we have the same rates that we have in place right now would be the same rates we would have for 2021. As we move on through years 2 through 5, we have 2 estimated rate increases, but we'll wait till we get to 22 to talk about that because a lot can change between now and then.
Those contracts haven't been bid yet, so we haven't seen what the actual, we've had estimates of what the cost is gonna be, but we haven't put those bids out yet.
We have a cost of service study that has given us a prescribed rate change step progression year over year, but because we've had a delay in two of our large capital projects with the reservoir and AMI, there's really no need to have the increase this year. Can defer it to a future year, and that's the plan in this 5 years. So, looking at telecom, as I mentioned, we are not in 5 years, no changes to rates on anything except cable TV. So that's, no internet changes, security changes, local long-distance phone changes.
Those are strictly pass-throughs.
Correct. The cable TV, that's something we've talked about with our customers every year, usually in January, when we look at renewing cable TV programming contracts. Those contracts are usually 3 to 5 years, and each one requires a baked-in rate increase that FPB, we are a reseller of cable TV. We pay the programmer, we resell it back to FPB customers. So that's something that is just industry-wide. We've been pressure on us with programming rates for years. There's nothing new there. But good news, out of all the services we offer, the only change in rates for fiscal year 21 would be the cable TV. So I'm very
And that'd
happy.
be, Jordan, that's like paying Time Warner or Fox or ESPN or who we've got to pay for that, or Wave or WLKY or whatever. John?
Dave, let me follow up something you said earlier about the assumption you made about the reduction in power revenue, reduction in use of power.
Yes, sir.
Especially in response to the pandemic. Is it a situation where, when you made that assumption, did you fall more heavily? Did you think that was going to be a bigger drop on our industrial customers, our plants, et cetera, et cetera? I mean, did you think that was going to be a big, their use was going to go down more than residential use? How did you all make that? Where did y'all come to that assumption?
We went 5 across the board for
Okay.
all customers. It's hard to know. I know when you look at revenue, let's just looking at electric. I'm looking at page 3 of that supplemental. 45% of our revenue in electric is due to our large power customers. 35% is residential. And I know it's very easy for residential customers to make decisions about their power usage. How are you going to keep that thermostat, which is the main driver of the cost of. So we assumed, not knowing really how this is going to affect everyone, 5% across the board.
Okay.
The demand charges are only paid by the large power
Right.
customers.
Right, okay.
And what, based on our information you have here, 45% of our electric usage is the large customers, right?
Yes, sir. 35% residential, commercial at 13, and then from there, smaller slivers for our municipal customers, such as the city or county, street security lights, and then we break out our own usage. It's important for us to know how much we use as well.
So residential is 35% of everything, of our total electric.
Total electric.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
When you look at company-wide revenue,
I think one key point I would make, you talked about, and our usage is broken out, the where it pays its own electric bill.
yes.
It does not have a free ride on electricity, it pays the bill just like everyone else, so.
So look at total revenue, 59% of all revenue from the electric division, 29% from our telecom division, 12% from our water division. Whenever you look at Mr. Snyder, the decrease in estimated revenue from the customers are going to use 5% less.
Right.
If the customers aren't purchasing power, then we don't pay for
Right.
power. So it's very close to an offset.
Right.
We, of course, have a little margin. We have to pay for administrative expenses, capital spending, debt service, which is small for electric. But it really didn't have a massive impact to us. We hope that the economic situation gets back to normal and back to where we were in early March as quick as possible.
Yeah.
But if it doesn't, we feel good about what we've estimated.
Excellent.
I guess at this point, if it's all right with everybody, maybe we'll move to electric for a quick overview and then questions.
Sounds good. I'll be glad. Let's go ahead and move over to page 20. If you don't mind, I'll do a quick summary of the electric funding summary and then can let Vent go into anything you might want in detail. So looking at page 20, operating and other revenue. When I say operating revenue, I'm talking specifically on energy sales to all of our customer classes. Other revenue just to bring it out, what some other revenue, what might that be? Whenever we have customers that want to extend new service to their property or to their business, they'll have to pay for a portion of that build out. So we get capital contributions is what we call. There are collection charges as far as fees and other fees associated with service that we collect. And we do have some other miscellaneous revenue such as material sales and other things like that, interest income. So when you look at total revenue, line 20, estimated for fiscal year 21 at just over $58.9 million. When you add your division expenses and your admin expenses, total gross margin just over 12 million. Back out from that all administrative overhead, just under 4.5, and you'll see on line 105, increase in net position for our electric division, estimated to be just over 7.5 million. And when you add back on line 115, depreciation expense, so we have had assets that we purchased in cash in prior years and are attributing a part of the expense over the economic producing part of that asset. You see expense estimated at 2.3 for depreciation. Looking at line 125, we talked about internally funding of two projects. This is line 125 and 130. So proposing that our electric division would have an intercompany loan to the water division for $4.5 million for the water reservoir project. Then on lines 140, that's part of the administrative building bonds that are attributable to electric. That's the principal payment there. And on line 145 and 150, it's a positive number because this is the funds coming back from water to help service the debt on the water reservoir loan. So when you get to current year production of income versus and add the cash balance beginning of the year, you get cash available for capital contributions, line 165 at just under 38.7. Electric capital additions planned is 6.6 million. And then you have 145,000 of other amounts from support departments, bringing the estimated year-end balance of June 30, 21 to just over 31.9 million. All the rest of the 4 years are pretty similar, except for year 2. We mentioned another intercompany loan to water for the AMI project. We originally had planned water's portion of the AMI project to be paid for with, we paid off in December of 19, just a few months ago, a Series 2009 electric and water revenue bonds. That was a 1.2 million in debt service per year that we no longer pay. Thank goodness. That's nice to have those. When you start seeing that debt roll off, you can use the money for other things. In looking at the numbers, when you laid it out over years, it became clear that to keep water in a positive cash balance or close to a positive cash balance, we needed to stretch out the payments on that. So an intercompany loan made most sense of keeping water as solid as financially possible.
Now, earlier in the year, David, we postponed awarding a bid on the AMI.
Yes.
Now, does this budget for 21 include then awarding a bid or getting that project back underway?
It does. I don't know if you want to speak to any of the or thoughts there on that.
Yeah, our I think if I'm not mistaken, and tell me if I am, David, that we estimated the AMI starting up later in the year, maybe in the late fall or so. Again, that would be for twofold reasons. Number one, the situation is fluid right now. We don't exactly know where things are going here. We're starting to get a clearer picture, of course, but then also with the vendors, they're completely in upheaval as well. They don't have the folks available at the time we started that particular piece. We do intend with this budget proposal to move forward with AMI. I think one thing to keep in mind is the electric and water departments have been putting off meter changeouts and buying new meters and a lot of infrastructure there, knowing this project is coming. So we're really getting in a situation where if we do not make a decision on the AMI, we're just going to have to start buying a lot of replacement meters and hope they would work. And so there will be additional costs there that we would prefer to be able to make sure they work with AMI.
So what's your assumption in terms of either will we need to rebid that AMI contract, or can we still award under the RFP? And you think that would start probably in the fall?
I believe we could. I mean, Hans would have to jump in here, but I believe we could under the same RFP. The vendor has agreed because of the situation to continue to hold things. So, we're not talking about any changes in price. If that came in, then everything would be a different
And that's
situation.
budget, that figures are budgeted in this.
Yes, sir. They're the same figures, the same budget numbers that were included that you saw previously.
I'm sorry, you all jump in.
Yes. So they would hold things as we had agreed to and we're close to signing. All that stuff would stay the same. If they needed changes to the terms due to the COVID situation, we would have to bring those back to the board for modification. Well, I mean, the contract has not been signed. That would be brought to the board anyway, but that would be brought to your attention certainly if that was a change. So I do not believe if we continue the way the evaluation has been done, the prices are still the same, that we would need to rebid that or anything.
David, Ben, go on.
No, that is the funding summary which brings together the income statement and all of so that was, that divisional summary brings in the income statement and then all of the balance sheet items that affect cash balance. So we can delve into more of the income statement for electric, or if you'd like to have Vent focus on some of the capital projects, we can go either way you'd like.
Well, let me just kind of start off and then turn it over to everybody. From fiscal 20, basically straight continuation, is there anything in this budget for electric other than normal continuation for everything that goes on just every day? Is there anything other than normal continuation that needs to be brought out or discussed?
Do you want me to answer?
Yeah, if you go.
I don't know of anything outside of the norm. The one thing, if you do remember at the last board meeting, we saw that our tree trimming bids were significantly higher than they had
Right.
been. So that is reflected on page 21, line 70, under overhead lines. You go from a budget last year of 725 to 1.25 million, and that's where that's reflected. I would consider that of the expenses the biggest change. It's the exact same service, it's just the cost went up, you know. That's the big change I would see from an expense side with them. No new service, no new product necessarily, but that would be it. From the capital side of things going forward, there's a few items, the capital is on page 22, there's a few items there that you might call large ticket items for replacing transformers and substations, the large station class transformers. There's a few of those throughout the budget year in your lines, you know, 50, 55 and those kind of things. Those kind of projects are there, but to be honest, that's something that we continually do every few years as we move around the system, replacing those items due to age. That's pretty common, so that's not unusual, but they are bigger ticket items. We've discussed AMI. One note that we did last year and we have included in the budget is page 22, line 190. You will see the electric vehicle charging stations have been continued. There is a price drop there, because after we put the first one in, we believe we can do it for a little cheaper than what we originally thought. So if we continue to do 3 stations, that assumption, if the board wants to continue that, has been placed in there. But again, that's a continuation of what we've already done. That's not new.
So this budget includes continuing the existing 3 stations.
Continuing the existing 3 stations every year, I believe, is what we have in here on line 190.
But it's not adding any additional stations.
Excuse me, adding 3 additional stations every year, I believe is what we
Okay.
have in here.
I have, can I ask a question?
Sure, yeah.
Do we know what the usage is on the ones that we already have?
We do have that information. I don't have it. I can send it to you. We have the usage information. We know roughly the number of different vehicles that are using it. We know if they're local or out of the zip code area, that kind of things. We have that kind of data. I can provide that to you.
Yeah, I'd just be curious to know how much the current ones are being used before we think about adding other ones.
There's 2 things that make it a little difficult, even with the numbers we have, is they really have become operational in the last couple of months, all 3 of them. And obviously with the current situation, how much driving are we seeing?
True.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things, even though it's in the budget, we can provide the board with the data that we have from that every couple of months, and then at some point if the board said, okay, we think it's, go ahead, or, you know, if you wanted to conditionally have that item and release the funds later in the year, if you determined, that's certainly something we could work out with you if that would be your pleasure. Or we could remove it from this current year and leave it in there, or however you would like to work that. But the assumption made in here was that we would continue on.
John?
Yeah, this whole thing came on before these were established before my tenure on the board. Could you give me a real brief thing about how these operate? I mean, is it a thing where you put your credit card in to pay for it, and what kind of rates do we charge? And, I mean, how much would it be to recharge a standard Volt or, whatever, just a normal compact car?
Okay, the system, the network system that we're involved in with our electric charging stations is a company called ChargePoint, and you have to have a ChargePoint account, and so that you set up a kind of like a Pay, Android Pay or something, or Apple Pay or something like that account. When you pull up to the station, it has a little screen. You use your phone, or you can use a credit card or whatever, but you use your phone and you use your account. And that same network allows folks who are moving through the area to be able to locate the charging stations. And it tells you the status, whether they're currently occupied. You can get on waiting lists. It'll notify you when it's available, et cetera. So it takes it from something that it becomes actually useful with the network. So again, that's through the ChargePoint network, so customers could do that. It's our standard electric rate. The city pays for the energy usage on those. We partnered with the city to put the stations in, and then they pay the energy usage the way they're currently set up. Under our statutes, we cannot give away energy. I believe the way it is right now, the city is paying the energy usage, so I don't believe the customer necessarily has a charge right now. Gary, you have an electric car, I know. Could you tell us, and I'm sure you're pretty familiar with what it costs to recharge if you had to pay?
If you have to pay, right, if you charge our regular rate, we have a 9.4 cents
Yes.
incremental. So that means if you have like a Volt, right, you only can charge like a 3 kilowatt per hour. So you probably have talk about 30 cents, so less than 30 cents, if you charge them. But if you have a more like a Tesla, they can go 6 kilowatt hour. So you talk about, if you charge 1 hour, you talk about 60 cents. So it's not a significant.
Are we moving our fleet, our overall fleet, more towards either electric or compressed natural gas or whatever? I mean, I see different things. Are we shifting our fleet any towards that way, or?
We are not shifting our fleet toward compressed natural gas. We are evaluating the electric car situation. We have done various tests through the years with electric vehicles on some of our larger industrial trucks and bucket trucks, and those have not worked out well at all in this situation. With our smaller vehicles, that is something we're looking to move into as we, I don't know if there's one specifically in this budget off the top of my head, but Leanne could probably answer that if you want, or I can get back to you with the answer on that.
Okay. She just said no.
Okay.
I see her through the door.
We have priced those and looked at them over the past few years, but currently there's not one in there.
Steve?
I know the price is cheap, but has the city bought into supporting, subsidizing additional 3 stations?
What was the first part of your
Has
question?
the city's bought into subsidizing those additional 3 stations?
No. They agreed to the first 30. That's what I'm saying. Before we would actually spend the money, there's what's our usage? Is the city going to go ahead and do those particular pieces or not? They're going to have the exact same question. How many people are using these? How far are we going? So those hurdles would need to be crossed before.
So you're saying a typical car would, and I'm just going to be ballparkish, maybe 80 cents a car to charge it?
If you charge 2 hours, if you have a Tesla, that may be true.
Well, somewhere under $1. I'm just
Less
trying
than
to
$1.
yeah.
Could be only 10 cents if you only stay there 1 hour, or 20 cents or hour. So sometimes if you use a car, the car fee may higher than the actual charge.
Mhm.
So it's not a significant one way or another, except if people stay there for 10 hours.
I guess my question goes through, and I want to name at the discussion with the city commission on these things, one of the discussions was the fairness of of putting these things out there to be utilized free by people who have electric cars, and obviously the demographics of who can afford an electric car. And I just kind of question us spending ratepayers' money, who the majority, from an ecological thing, I can see it and all that, but spending ratepayers' money who, for the most part, won't be able to use it, and it's being provided free after the investment. The investment made to something that most can't use, and it's also being provided free by the city. And just a question out there for me on that.
One other question on the energy audits.
Yes, sir.
How much have we spent this year on the energy audits? How much was budgeted and how much have we spent?
That one, Travis, if you're listening, maybe you could step in the, or never mind, David knows it off the top of his head.
Yeah, we budgeted 50,000 for the current fiscal year, and we have spent
It's a little over half
it
that,
was,
if I'm not mistaken.
20,000. I think there's $30,000 left.
We've done,
35 audits were completed, and there were 10 that have asked for audits, but we quit doing them due to COVID-19. If we were to do those other 10, that's $5,000 more. You would be at about $25,000 remaining in the budget. So I think the way the contract's written, the time's going to run out on the contract before we can actually get the funds expended. So at June 30, I believe the contract's over, and whatever funds are left can be it'll be sitting in cash waiting for whatever
Did we get a
else.
bigger demand, or was there, what was, before things pretty much shut down, I mean, were we getting a lot of requests, or had it kind of, because I know one of the questions we talked about is, do we have any information on, like, the demographics of, not by name, but generally where they went and could we get some information for that, maybe
Sure,
for the board
you can-
members?
Out of the 35 that we've completed, you saw them come in pretty quickly when we first launched the service, and then it did start to taper off there towards the end. I know we had done this years ago and didn't really think the demand would be that high. I don't think we're surprised that we only are going to spend half the funds. I don't think that's a surprise to staff. But yes, we can give you some numbers on just who's asking for them. It's residential customers, but give you a little more idea of how it transpired.
Okay.
yeah. Back to the electric vehicle charging stations. Those monies or that project wouldn't be spent, like, we don't even know where the locations would be. That would have to work out as well. The city would have to agree to do it. Again, I think we agree you would want to see some statistics under a more normal usage pattern on what it was happening. So, again, whether the money's in there or not, that I don't think staff in any way envisioned we would just automatically put 3 stations in. So that would be something you would, as we did it before, I think you all approved the locations as well, just like the city did. So that's just something I wanted to make sure was clear in there.
Because the locations are Juniper Hills, the Farmers Market, and then they're by Whitaker Bank. isn't it?
Behind Whitaker Bank in that Olive Alley, I think it's called, or Olive Street, maybe. Yes.
Any other electric questions?
Yeah, I was gonna say, that was the major items on there that I would like to bring to your attention.
Okay, if it's all right with everybody, maybe we'll take about,
Sorry.
no,
What do you want to say? Do you have a new position?
Yeah.
Electrical.
We have no new positions in electric for the coming year.
maybe it's okay, we'll take about a 10-minute break and then come back. We're coming back out of recess and pick back up where we were. David, I guess we're now with water.
Yes, sir. I have answer Mr. Snyder's question on the breakdown of tier 1, 2, 3
Okay.
employees. We have approximately 200 employees that participate in the CERS retirement plan, and 60 of those are tier 3. So about 30% today. And then in 2025, we'll make the switch. Your tier 2 was such a small group of employees that it's the lowest right now. This is the lowest number. So yes, looking at water now, we would like to start on page 28 of the water funding summary. So page 28 of the budget. I'll work through the water funding summary like I did the company-wide and electric. So operating revenue on line 10, we're estimating $12.2 million in revenue from sales of water to our all customer classes. On line 15, we estimate other water revenue, various miscellaneous type of revenue gained from other revenues of $307,000. Total revenue estimated just over $12.5 million. We have our electric water divisional expenses at $4.1 million, with our water administrative expenses at $3.5, bringing gross margin to 4.9 on line 35. When you subtract all of the administrative expenses that are allocated to the water division on lines 40 through 95, that's a total of $3.1 million. You have an increase in net position of just under $1.8 million. To that, we'll take, that's income produced through the income statement. We add back to that. Now we're going to a cash basis statement, adding depreciation expense of just under $2 million. In year one, fiscal year 21, you can see on line 125, we have the intercompany loan, so that's an inflow of cash to fund the water reservoir project. Then you see on lines 140 through 165, those are principal payments on long-term debt, bringing your total current cash funding for the current year just under $6.8 million. Add about $1 million that we started the year with, and you have $6.9 million available for, $7.8 million available for capital additions. You can see our first 2 years of line 185, pretty heavy spending and infrastructure investment due to the reservoir and the AMI project. So in fiscal year 21, just under $6.9 million in capital spending. And then another 107 from administrative departments, bringing your estimated cash balance a year from now, June 30, 21, at just over $830,000. The other 5 years of this, the only thing really other thing worth noting is in year 2, line 130, a cash inflow internal intercompany loan of $3.2 million for the AMI project, if the board were to approve and move forward with that. Some good news, you'll notice on 140 that we pay off our Series 2013 bonds, or paid off. In year 5, we'll no longer be paying for those. So we're starting to, we have a good trend going here with our long-term debt. And as we pay off debt, no more principal and interest payments, those funds will be reallocated primarily into infrastructure investment. But that's where we are. At the very bottom, looking at the divisional cash requirements, you see that line 255, our debt and bond covenants, we must maintain around $1.2 million to satisfy those covenants. And we're estimating that minimum cash reserve at $1.9 million, and our maximum, our minimum recommended at just $5.5 million. Water division it's expensive to operate. Everything is underground. It takes a lot of equipment, and we just don't have the upward ability on rates so we're usually hovering very close to a break even when you look at the final cash balance in water, which is why we're asking for a little intercompany loan from electric. But that's the overall general water budget for fiscal year 2021. I will give you I know you have asked Mr. Cubine just the differences there. Budget to actual for water, for budget to actual changes, we're actually coming in almost right on budget, $157,000 estimated above budget in water, which is, I call it essentially break even after on the $7 million water expenses. Looking at budget to actual, I just got those flip-flopped. That's right. Budget to budget, 20 to 21, there's an increase of $459,000 for the water division. So I'd be glad to answer any questions, or if I could delve further into it.
John, if you don't mind.
Sure.
You sent us, David Billings we were forwarded an email from David Billings about the current state of the reservoir, the last inspection we had. And John, I think you asked a question, and I don't know whether it's been sent back to us or not. Are those repairs with the construction of the new reservoir, what are we looking at for maintenance and upkeep on the old reservoir to keep it, however, in whatever shape it needs to be in, just at a bare minimum to get us through to the construction of the new reservoir?
I'm asking David to come in and talk a little bit more
Great.
about it. We have a very minimal amount of money. I think it was my understanding was that if there were any things that were critical that we thought wasn't gonna hold up over the next few months, that we would spend the money to do anything like that.
Okay. Yeah,
Obviously,
you just
we're not.
answered the bat phone here. It's coming in.
Yeah, on
There
page,
you go.
yeah, on page 34, page 34, the next to the last line does show those take inspections. At 15,000 in year one, 25,000 in year two, and then they're zeroed out years 3 through 5, because we would have a new tank.
Are we assuming are we assuming the status quo on any wholesale customers during this next budget?
We're assuming them to stay the same,
Okay.
is my understanding. David?
David, I don't know how much you heard of what was going on out there, and the question that I asked about the inspection report we received on the old reservoir, and the question that Chairman Cubine had in terms of what are we gonna need to spend in just maintenance to keep it functional until we can get the new tank built.
The very, very few items that they found on the last inspections already been taken care of.
Okay,
So our game plan was to go in just prior to demolition
okay,
and do the one side that we're gonna rely on. And we have $25,000 budgeted in this budget.
in this budget, okay,
For point repairs, which is typically what we've been doing,
okay,
as well as the inspection.
okay. And shoring that up will get us through while we're building the other tank, and then when that's done, we'll be able to go and demolish that one, and then we'll be in good shape, great.
Generally speaking,
General,
speaking, our yearly point repairs and inspection have gotten us through to the next year.
Okay,
So I
good.
would expect that, I can't guarantee, but I would
I know.
expect that pattern to remain.
great, okay, excellent.
Thank you, Dave. Steve, you got any questions? Dawn?
Do
Any-
you check to see if the groundhog comes out of the inspection?
They're up there inspecting on a regular basis.
Anything in this budget, while you're in here, David, too, anything in this budget from a straight continuation, any expense or anything other than obviously the reservoir, anything else that's,
Out of the norm.
Yeah.
You normally see. Most everything here with their budget is very much continuing on. The one thing I would bring to your attention in capital, besides the AMI type things and the reservoir we've already discussed, would be for the water treatment plant, the chemical feed upgrade. That's 1.2 million for the ammonia and sulfuric process. So that is a fairly large project. If you want, David, you can go into a little more detail on the project if you want to, but that's the thing that's a little bit different than what we would normally do, for sure.
You remember last fall when the ammonia feed system failed at the water treatment plant? We're trying to avoid that going forward. That system's been in place since I've been here. I don't know exactly when it was put in. So we have 1.2 budgeted for the construction of a new ammonia system, and also some minor improvements to the sulfuric. The engineering for that, I do want to bring a change to the board's attention since we're talking about that project. On page 19, line 860, we had a placeholder of $150,000 for engineering for that. That's not going to be enough. It's going to be more like $300,000, so that's one of the changes that I will be bringing to David's attention to put in the final budget. And the other correction I wanted to bring to the board's attention is on page 35, line 735.
what was that again?
Line 35, page 35, line 735. We're under contract, I'm looking at the AWIA Risk and Resiliency Assessment and Emergency Response Plan. When I had the board approve that contract, I assumed that I could roll over those funds that I had for another study into this year. Those were categorized as an expense, and the county department has told me that I can't roll over an expense. So I had monies budgeted for another project that I was going to use for the risk assessment. So that $40,000 in FY21, it needs to go to $85,000 to include the risk assessment and the emergency response plan. So that $40,000 goes to $85,000. And then in FY25, you'll see that the cycle continues. that FY '25, that'll be another risk assessment in the following year will be emergency response plan. You just don't see FY '26.
But those,
Those will be spread out over those 25 and 26, those will be spread out between the 2 years.
If they do the cycle the same way they do it,
Since we're on this page, David, Ms. Hale, you had a question on line 835. This was the school water fountains. This was a board-initiated project. We have spent no money on it this year, and it was just included in because it was a board initiative. So that was, just want to bring that to your attention. It's in there for the next 5 years as well.
What happened on that? What's the status of that?
There have been no school water fountains installed. Now, the ones in the community, the public water fountains have all been put in, and I think there's actually one waiting for Dolly Graham soon.
that's my understanding.
But the school system, was, just, there's not been anything done on that one.
Has there been no interest, or?
Any interest in the schools for it?
You know, I don't think there was just any move. Once we hit March, it was over, and then
Yeah.
before that, there was no. It just wasn't. It wasn't taken up with. I'm sure the school would appreciate any free, any infrastructure they don't have to pay for. But
There was no actual, there was the initial request from Franklin County Schools, which we denied. And then this was put in there without there being any request from the schools.
What does 10,000 get you on school water fountains? One, two, one per
I
school?
think it
mean,
was
what
going to be
does-
close to 2. I think they were close to 7,000, 8,000 apiece between.
It was more than just a water fountain. It was also had the bottle station.
Okay.
Part of it, if I recall correctly.
But I just since that was a board question, I wanted to bring it up.
Thank you.
We were on that same page.
so there's no other items beyond that big project that I would consider noteworthy that is something that would be completely out of the norm. I mean, there's smaller projects, and I'll be happy to talk to those that you can see on page 30, but nothing that I would bring to the level of a major project.
Any new positions or anything?
No, sir, not in the water department.
Okay. Any other questions for water? Okay, let's move to telecom.
All right.
I will take my leave, sir.
Hey, when you go out, tell Adam to come in.
Okay, but the money for Dolly Graham's water fountain is still in the budget, right?
Yes, it's already been purchased. We have it and everything. We're just waiting for them to tell us where and do the things they need.
Yes.
Yeah, we have it, right?
Yes.
It's purchased, it's on site, and we're ready to go, but I guess you would say the labor put it in, but that's relatively small.
So our telecommunication funding summary on page 37. We have our operating revenue on line 10 for the year at just over 28.5 million. This is the sale of services for cable TV, internet, security, phone, and any other items directly for telecom. And then other revenue of 263,000. Total revenue at just under 28.8 million. Our telecom divisional expenses, 16.3. Administrative expenses, just under 6 million, brings our gross margin to just under 6.5 on the division for fiscal year 21. When you take out on lines 40 through 95, the $4.7 million in administrative department budgets that are allocated to telecom, on line 105, you have an increase in that position of just under 1.8 million. We add back depreciation for the year of going from a accrual-based statement to a cash-based statement of 3.3 million. And then we have, as you'll notice on line 130, this is a first lien note on the telecom division. Have really good news. In line 3, or column 3, you see that we pay off this debt for its average is $2 million a year, a little more with interest, but we pay $1.5 million as we pay it off in fiscal year 22. So that money going forward is going to be used, proposed to be used in the infrastructure reinvestment for the telecom division. So on 135 and 140, additional debt principal payments on debt service, bringing your total cash funding for the current year of just over 2.2 million. On line 150, over $8 million in infrastructure. Hold it back. I got ahead of myself. Line 150, our beginning cash balance estimated to be at $8 million, bringing total cash available for capital additions of 10.3. You can see we have just under $4 million proposed in capital additions for telecom on line 160. And with a few items there for administrative departments, you bring your total year-end cash reserve balance estimated June 30, 2021 at just under $6.3 million. You can see at the very bottom, we do have some division cash requirements for debt and bond covenants that we must keep on lines 205 and 210. In a perfect situation, we'd like to see on line 230, you can see we'd like to see close to 12.2 million. It's difficult to do that and keep rates under control. And as you can tell, we're doing a lot of money right back into the system on line 160 as we try to upgrade the system to service well into the future, especially as it relates to internet service. With that, I can go into any detail between myself, Adam, and Vint, and cover any items you might want to.
Steve?
None right now.
I was gonna say I can hit a couple of the bigger projects if
Okay.
you want to do that particular part too. If you look over on page 39, you'll see the capital for the telecom department. Two of the items, 85 and 90, are associated with the reservoir. The moving the tower on the site and then relocating the dishes are both included in there. That's a little something, of course, that would not have been in our normal budgets. The other thing to kind of bring to your attention is the community Wi-Fi project, line 50. We're continuing that with $25,000 each year. Again, those are, as we get the opportunities, are going to be in picnic shelters, public pavilions of the parks, and those type of things.
John,
Another board
excuse me, let me
initiative.
ask you one question
Sure.
on the moving of the satellite. Why wouldn't that be part of the overall expense of the reservoir, which would be in the water division? Because they're not moving it because they have to move it. They're moving it because it has to be moved.
They're moving it because it has to be moved, but it is a telecom expense. It's
No,
not.
but it's being moved involuntarily as it relates to so why would it be their expense when it really is an expense caused by the water division?
The assets of the telecom division are secured as collateral for the debt. I think, for lack of a better word, it's collateral damage on negotiations. I mean, it's a telecom infrastructure that, due to an agreement, needs to be moved, and it's going to be used. It's telecom funds.
Well,
So
I think more
understand-
specifically what Steve said, I can understand why the expense is there because that's where it's being spent, but where's the revenue coming to pay for it?
Yeah, it's just we've got it being covered in the budget for telecom.
Why wouldn't water pay for the collateral damage to Adam?
Water it's already financially it's taxed, I would say. If you look at that bottom cash balance for water, you could look at it and go about either way, but this is the way that we had looking at it. It was an infrastructure investment for telecom. Telecom pays for the moving of it, and then the water is going to cover the rest of the $4.7 million project.
I mean, I see Steve's point. I mean, clearly it's telecom incurring the cost. They got to move it. It's their equipment. But in terms of reimbursement, they're moving it because of the whole reservoir project. So what does that do to water if, in fact, the amount of water that the reservoir is getting that we're internally financing, that money just came from that and reimbursed Adam that way and it wasn't coming out of Adam's revenue?
Yeah, that could be done.
I guess my point with that, though, is as we start looking at trying to enhance telecom with fiber and all that,
Right.
we're taking money out of his budget involuntarily because of something else that happened. Thus, it's sort of slowing what we could be doing in fiber, which is a big thing for us.
Sure.
You
So
know.
we could definitely go the same route of intercompany reimbursement.
But I'm just saying that expense, that burdens, financial burden of moving those satellite dishes, in my opinion, should not be on telecom because they were just in the way of progress, if you will. And you know,
Right.
they are the collateral damage, they shouldn't have to pay for their the collateral damage is my point.
So we could definitely, if that's, we could go that route.
I mean, just look at it, I'm not saying.
Sure.
While we're talking about the dishes, when do you expect to start moving them?
Right now, we're in the process of getting, figuring out what exactly we need for a tower. I mean, we kind of had something submitted. We're reaching out to vendors and looking at that right now. As soon as we get that, and I guess the other part of that too is working with electric and water, making sure where we're going to put these does not cause any issues. That way we can turn it over and send it out for bid. And then at that point, we will start working on the satellite dishes, and the tower will kind of go at the same time. And then we'll prepare all the pads for the satellite dishes, and then it'll be probably a migration over 6 weeks.
The satellite dish pads, we know what those sizes are and everything else. The tower, that's not a normal thing that we move. So we really need to have that foundation and that setup designed, because it's going right in that farm.
Right.
So we really need it designed before we can see exactly where we place the other pieces. So like Adam was saying, it's kind of the tower step needs to happen, not completed, but it needs to be further down the road before I think we can move those. One other item I would bring to your attention
So
there.
let me,
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. So just the overall project at the reservoir, are y'all, the different divisions putting these things together, or is there a general contractor over all of this project that is coordinating plans? You know, with a big, sometimes you have a general contractor that can sort of be the integrator of all of these different things that have to fit together as a puzzle.
There is a general contract under the water department that covers the landscaping and all the stuff associated with the reservoir tank and all those pieces. These telecommunication pieces are separate from that contract because they're a totally different, it would be, I don't think it would be advantageous to try to get a water contractor to try to then pull somebody in to do the telecommunication pieces. We can reallocate the monies, but everything but the dish move and the tower move is under the water contract.
But in terms of sequencing and everything, so that the person doesn't come in when they're putting in the new reservoir and tear up something that Adams just moved, you know what I mean, as far as.
Right, those two pieces that I just mentioned with the telecom, they have to be done and out of the way before we can
Okay.
cut the people loose to do the actual water contract. But the landscaping and all those pieces are all part of that bigger.
See, we're looking out for you, Adam.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question, Mr. Mason?
Well, so I mean, I'm not really worried about the landscape. I'm just thinking when you started talking about that, Adam would have to do this, has to make sure this, and he may have to go out and
Right.
get someone to do this, and it all has to kind of fit together as I see it. And I'm not even looking at it from a financial point. I'm just thinking of the coordinating
Right.
of a complex project that all these pieces have to fit, and that it seems that you're getting different contractors contracted at different times to come and make sure that the logic of not just having someone that coordinates this whole thing.
Well, those two pieces are really the two telecom pieces. Those have to be done beforehand, and
Yeah.
they will be out of the way before the other person is even put onto a
Okay.
contract.
Yeah.
And there won't be interference there unless, they happen to damage a piece or something.
Yeah.
That wouldn't necessarily be involved.
Are there any new positions in the telecom budget?
There are 2 new positions in this particular year. I'll speak about one of those. Adam can add some more to it. One of the positions we're seeking to add is an assistant cable superintendent. We have not had that position for a while. The rest of the lines of business do have that position. It has become clear to me that when Adam's on vacation or out of town, or if something was to happen to Adam, we're really in a weak spot in the telecommunications department.
Kind of gets vacations?
Every once in
It's been a while.
That's the honest truth. It was a while, and when some of those things happened, it kind of reared its head that I really don't think we have good succession planning from that standpoint in the department. If you think about the technological scope that's encompassed by the telecommunication department, we do have individuals obviously that are ahead of smaller departments in the telecom, and they know the area well, but it became very apparent to me that while they know their areas, there's really not somebody prepared to take over that knows both sides and all the different pieces that are involved. So I think that's something that is needed. We are proposing to, in the previous budget, we had looked at adding a telecom engineer, a chief telecom engineer, in light of the planning of the infrastructure reinvestment and fiber to the home. I think that's pretty well taken care of right now in our plans and what we're doing. I think that money would be better spent if we did not fill that position and instead use that money to fill the assistant superintendent position. So I guess I would call that budget neutral, trading one that wasn't there for that. So I guess that's a swap that I think would be very important going forward with the number of employees, senior level telecom employees that are looking at retirements in the next few years. I think that would be an important thing
So
to do.
that one's a swap, so then is there two brand new ones?
No,
in
there's
addition?
one
Okay.
other additional for this coming year. That's a new position as an enterprise field technician. I guess I'll let Adam talk a little more about
Yeah, I
the
mean,
details of that.
basically, years ago, we had a telephone department. We had something in the telephone department called a sonnet technician, and they took care of a lot of the business customers, whether it be business phone or business internet. After with that kind of, we outsourced the phone and those positions went away. A lot of that was absorbed in part of telecom and a part of IT. And then what we've noticed is we have a shortage there of talent to be able to take care of these customers. And they're the largest customers that we have as far as monthly revenue. And so what we're asking to do is add one this year, and possibly there's one budgeted for next year too. But these customers would take care of our infrastructure, like our knock building, our head in, a lot of our stuff in the field that needs regular maintenance, and also take care of those customers as far as setting up. It's kind of like we have a business product specialist, but this is like the technician side of that position that actually can go in, turn the screws, make it work with the customers to work through issues. Right now, it's been jumbled between two different departments and several different people.
What about the security analyst that I know you all were looking at?
That's part of the IT department's
Okay.
task, and
Okay,
they'll talk about it here in just a little bit.
okay.
So I guess you would say of new positions, there are two new positions. One is a trade-off. The other one would be a totally new finance position. Yes, sir.
Okay.
The only other thing I would bring to your attention on page 39 is, and I should have brought this to your attention in the other two lines of business as well, it is a little bit different than what we normally do, is on line 80, the 2nd Street relocation. It's sometimes called the Tiger Grant. So there is a component from all three of our lines of business on some of the work being done there. So just kind of bringing that to your attention. It's 100 and what was it, 41,000 for telecom. So again, that's something that's a little different, but that's just coming up in this current year. Most of the project is being paid for by the grant. But
And that's
there
when
are
we
some
incur that
things.
cost ourselves, though.
We do incur that particular cost, yes.
Okay, you want to talk a little about the IT budget then, or?
Before,
Fine.
yes, sir. Do you want to explain a little more, line 95?
Yeah, this is the infrastructure reinvestment, or it's sometimes called fiber to the home
Okay.
project. You can see we've laid it out there in the various phases as we move through the whole project. We've tried to break it as evenly as we could across the multiple years to get the project done. That is, again, a continuation of what we're doing. We've made very good progress this year with what we've done so far. Even with the COVID, the contractors were able to keep working. And so we've been able to continue that. If there are specific projects, or Adam, if you want to talk a little bit about some of the statistics on where we're at right now, where we
Especially like where's phase 1 at, as far as,
What
I know there's
phase-
been some interest on that.
Phase 1 is complete. We're easing into phase 2 already. We had some leftover funds, and we figured the board would be kind of okay with it, so we're moving into phase 2. The only issue we're having right now or the only thing that's really stopping us from turning on new customers, well, a couple things. One, we have to set a new rate, which, we'll bring that public hearing to the board. The original plan had it slated for September. We're working really hard to hopefully make that deadline, but it's sourcing equipment, especially end user equipment, customer premise equipment, trying to get all that standardized and get what we need and make sure we have a supply for that equipment is where we're at now. As soon as we get those things ironed out, we should be able to get some friendlies on and start testing. Right now, as of today, we're doing some field testing for what the contractor's done. We were able to spend an additional $400,000 that was added to capital for this project, which will increase and make the original plan said we were going to have 6% as far as our coverage area for this budget year. We're able to take that to 10%. So we're moving a little faster. So that's a good thing.
Phase 2 would cover.
Phase 2 is the Meadows, Westwood Park, Meadow Glen, Riverbend, Parkside, Boonegard. Then we're kind of jumping out a little bit. We're going out South Carwell Lane, Evergreen, Schofield, Coolbrook area. And then, of course, to get to 7 and 8, we have to cross 87, which is Berry Hill. Mm-hmm. And so we'll pick Berry Hill up as we leave out of the head-end property. Only thing, I mean, I guess Node 7 was the addition. That was where we're picking up the additional footprint. All that was in the original IRP plan for Phase 2.
Can you just say again what the Phase 1 area is?
Phase
That's
1.
Downtown and.
Yeah, Phase 1 is downtown and Collins Lane, basically. You have both sides of the river downtown, and we stop, so you come up by the Capitol, all around the head end, and then the whole Collins Lane area was all part of Phase 1.
That was like 15% of our customer base.
15% of our customer base in Phase 1. So at the end of this year, we should be about right around 25%. As far as the 5-year plan, we'll be approaching 80%. So.
It looks like our cost estimates and everything are coming in about where we thought.
We're coming in pretty close. I think we're doing good. We're actually a little under, but anything that we've been able to do in-house and manage, we've been doing, like project management, and that's where we get into personnel in year 2, because we basically took the whole project management in-house. And so I have 2 of my senior supervisors doing that, and of course they're getting close to retirement. So, but we can talk about that later. So there's a savings there. A lot of the testing we've decided to take in-house, which is a savings there. So hopefully we're doing pretty good with the estimates.
David?
I think if we're good with telecom, no more questions, we can move, and just there's a couple of items on the administrative departments that I think would take us to 1 o'clock.
Okay.
Adam, if you don't mind, I think Casey will be ready to come in when you come out.
All right.
But until then, there's one thing I wanted to note. When you look at the administrative departments, as you can see, most of the cost in those is payroll and expense related. But there's something I wanted to bring up. It is a pretty significant increase from prior year budget. On page 57, this is our customer service budget. So on 57, looking at columns, line 35, column 2 versus column 4. Frankfurt Plant Board, when a customer ends their service with us and we have outstanding balances that are 90 days or older, we will consider those bad debt and we'll write them off. So a customer has closed their account and we have not received payment. Whatever has not been received after 90 days is written off. We've historically have $200,000 a year in bad debt expense. We actually had budgeted $200,000 for fiscal year 19-20, what we're in right now. Economy is doing well, and we were seeing some downward trends, and so we stuck $200. We have increased that to $600 for next year. Just the concerns we have with the impact in our service territory for COVID-19 and economic shutdown. We just think it's a smart idea that there's no doubt we're going to have higher bad debt expense. So one thing I wanted to bring to your attention, out of the $300,000 in average annual bad debt, we almost get half of that back. And most of the money we've received back are customers that had a bad debt balance come back to walk through our front doors and ask for new service. And we have to have a collected balance before you can start new service. So that's how we collect most of our bad debt is through that mechanism. But I just wanted to bring that up. We are still under executive order from Governor Beshear to suspend service disconnections and late fees, which we are continuing to do throughout the state of emergency that's still in effect. We have seen an increase in people taking advantage taking advantage in a good way of that if they've got a financial difficulty. We usually have 12% of our balances roll month to month, as far as they roll from one month to another in a late payment, and that's elevated about 6% during this time to about 18% of our customer base. Good news is we saw a downtick from April to May, or I should say from March to April. Hopefully we'll see the same from April to, no, I'm already stuck back. We did see, from April to May, we did see a downtick. Hopefully that will continue, so that we've gone through, showing me we've gone through hopefully some of the worst of the situation. Other than that, one of the things that we have in time remaining was wanting to discuss the IT budget. So let's look over. I've got Casey Jones, our IT director here. What we wanted to talk to you about is we provided the board with a staffing and risk mitigation management through succession planning document. And I wanted to highlight there are 2 new positions that we're asking for in the current fiscal year. The IT budget is on page 66, and then when you look at the actual payroll budget for the whole company is on page 15. And on page 15, you see the 2 positions in IT, lines 120 and 125, being requested. We've had them effective October 20. It's a senior network analyst and a senior security analyst. And I was going to ask Casey if you wouldn't mind just kind of sharing your thoughts on what we're trying to accomplish.
Absolutely. So I'm hoping that all of you have seen the draft of this document. I've known for a while that I'm approaching the age of retirement, and so it's becoming more and more important to me that we make sure that this department is set up for success in the coming years. And so that's why we came up with this document, to try to mitigate those risks that we saw upcoming. And so in this first year, we would like to add 2 new positions, a senior network analyst and senior security analyst. And those would become the anchors for the additional staff that we hope to add in the coming years. We're hoping to add 5 total new staff over the next 5 years, and eventually spin off that information security department as a separate entity. And year 4, I believe, is where I have that. So these, the senior network analyst is needed because Ryan Henry is my assistant IT director. He and I have been sharing the load of that work for many, many years, and he is effectively taking on multiple titles as senior programmer analyst, assistant IT director, senior network analyst. I'm sort of taking on multiple titles as senior security analyst, IT director, and so the workload and trying to divvy out these various tasks has just increased to the point where it's not sustainable. And so that's the immediate need that we're hoping to have the board's assistance with.
What would be in the 3, on the total of 4, but the 3 actually new positions? We're talking about 1 the swap, but the 3 total.
Mm-hmm.
When would be the effective date? You have those in this budget that they're budgeted to start?
Yes, sir. On page 15, lines 120 through 135, the IT positions are both scheduled, if the board were to approve, October of 2020 was the estimated start date, and then on telecom, January of 21, 6 months in the year, was the estimated hiring date for the other 2. So you can see there on in the middle of the page, 120 through 135, those are all new positions in the 5-year budget. Of course, these have to be created, graded, and then brought to the board for approval
then advertised and.
Right. So it's gonna, if the board were to say yes today, it would take us some time to get to the hiring stage.
Dawn, oh, I'm sorry. Steve?
Any questions about the staffing?
I do have a
No.
question. I'm not sure if it's specific to you. It's kind of something I think I've heard central through all of these things. This succession planning. One, I assume that y'all have guidance manuals on how to, written guidance manuals or something that tells you how to do the processes that you do. Do you have any formalized manuals that, tells me how to be a senior, whatever they do? Is it in a written document that someone can take with the correct education and knowledge to, background knowledge? Could take that and say reasonably follow how to do a process.
I think since we have Casey here and we're asking for IT.
Well, it is a question that's
Right.
germane to you, but it's really a central question.
Sure. I was going to use him as an example in detail, but company-wide, I know across the company, each division has separate policy manuals and different things for their department. I was going to use Casey in their example and request for a new staff, and you talked about the level of increase in complexity of our system. We're looking at now, as we talked about fiber to the home, running 2 telecom networks, implementing AMI, and then we're in a new security world as well, which we've been in for a while.
Right.
So I think this might be a good example of, is that something you can just pick up a manual and read, or it just as experience is
It's
what
not that
you?
procedural.
Well, I know, I'm not saying that the manual, you look at the manual, you just become proficient at doing whatever it's telling you to do. What I'm asking you is, because you have mentioned succession through all of these budgets, I'm asking, is there a process manual, not a policy manual, a manual that describes the processes that a given position would go to do whatever is assigned to those, to the duties that are assigned to that position? Because to me, that would be a proactive step in starting the succession preparation, because
Right.
First of all, we're gonna do a decree that you can't leave in for 10 years. We don't have to worry about it. But, he may leave it in the second, may leave it in the third, may leave too for whatever
Right.
reason. And now,
Right.
that succession planning that you're talking about, that I see you doing in here, it's gone. So, what's the written documentation on how to do specific duties for a particular position in the planning board? Because that is the first step I think you're gonna need to do succession planning.
I think the answer is yes, because I know, as my time before CFO in the finance department, we have different policy manuals to help people understand how to do different processes. We try to, as much as we can in the company today, with not even succession planning, but having cross-functional training so people know how to do different functions. We just talked about if Adam's gone, who's going to do this function, and having that cross-department, or I should say inter-department cross-training. So I think in general I can say yes, we have that type of thing. We're talking about going to a deeper level of having the person be able to now take the keys of the car and drive on their own, and not waiting until the person leaves, that position leaves before we bring someone in, which is what happens a lot today in general, not in most companies. But when we are looking at key positions in the company needing to have the experience and expertise to take off for the next chapter of the department or division, we're stepping it up a notch from procedure manuals to truly having the person understand day one what they need to do to lead the department.
Well, again, I don't understand how new positions equate to succession planning, because succession planning to me is I'm getting my second person, as I think y'all trying to do, ready, and the person under that person ready to step up or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So what's that have to do with new positions, succession is that?
I think Casey just mentioned too the fact that today we're stretching our staff, let's just use IT, to the point where they're carrying multiple duties that are getting so far expanded that it's consuming the department. We don't have enough resources. We don't have enough people.
But you have a vacant position in the current budget that hasn't been filled. I assume it started July
That's a-
1st of last year?
And that gets
was
and that gets into the importance of having our PACE compensation plan structured in such a way that we can recruit talent that we need to be the next generation of leaders in the company.
So the reason that position hasn't been filled because the pay is not enough to attract a person?
We have advertised multiple times looking for sufficient talent, and we've had some applications, but nobody with the skill set that we were looking for. And we're hoping, so part of, we do have a regrade of this position to, I think it's I think it's going from a 112 to a 113, in hopes of maybe attracting somebody with some more talent.
So what does that do to the other positions that are existing? I mean, I'm not naming names here, but
Right.
I see the grades.
Yeah,
So what does that do
at
to the people who are already here at the 113s? Because I
No,
see at least two.
The position itself is graded at a 112 today, and so there is one person in a similar role at that grade. So if that got regraded, that person would get that regrade. We're also creating a supervisory position for that systems analyst section of our IT department.
Okay, at this point, it's just a little after 1, and I know, everybody kind of has some commitments in that we need to kind of stay on schedule for this work session. Let me ask two things. One, I think we've had a good process today going through it. One, does everybody think we need another work session? And two, I've made some notes and kind of listened to what everybody talked about and some things we've kind of gone through. I can throw something out for everybody to kind of think about, but do we need to have another meeting? Or I can throw something out for everybody to think about, let David take a look at that, you all provide him other feedback, and then we come back at the regular meeting later this month and then kind of hash it out and go through it. What's everybody's pleasure?
I follow the group.
John?
I'm fine, Mr. Chairman, if you feel like we're at a point where we can have something together, I think there are still a few questions in terms of a couple of board things and
Yeah.
a couple other things we're gonna need to talk about. We can certainly talk about that at our regular meeting if you'd like. We might discuss at our regular meeting, and if it turns out the regular meeting's not enough, turn around and hold a special just to approve the budget before the end of the month,
Dawn?
I was just looking at the calendar, our meeting's on the 16th.
So that still gives
So
us.
that gives us time to have a special meeting if we needed to
Yeah.
afterwards.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let me just kind of run through just a couple notes here, just real quick. And like I said, we're not taking any votes or anything today. This is just for discussion to kind of give David some things to think about and come back and report to us. Because then we need to go into a real brief closed session. On salary, I know this is really sensitive. I know it looks like the city and county is going to be real tough. Looks like the school district will be tough. We know state government's not going to be getting anything. We don't know what the
Mr.
COLA is
Chairman,
going to be.
Not only not getting anything, I don't want to speak out of turn, but you may be looking at some furloughs and stuff.
Yes.
So, it's more drastic than just not getting a pay
Right.
increase.
So, and it's a tough time with the pandemic, unemployment's high, and we know we've got a workforce that's worked hard, that's been working during this whole time and keeping the power on, the service, and I know we all appreciate that. Diane's provided us information in terms of turnover and that in some areas, especially in the linemen, some areas, and we've had a long-standing policy about the people below midpoint. And I don't know what the dollar impacts of these are, but just kind of going through, looking at what would it look like if we went something with one bump of employees below midpoint rather than the two that we normally do, either on July 1st or January 1st. In terms of employees, we think probably based on what we're looking at CPI, and I looked at some things on Federal Reserve and that, and it looks like CPI probably will be around 1% this year or a little less. And we're early. I mean, energy prices, a lot of things affected, but maybe tie something around January 1st in terms of employee raises rather than July 1st to what the COLA is, what the Social Security COLA is that's awarded in January. keep the energy audits about the same as what was spent this year, rather than the 50, whatever we think this year, 2025, budget that for the energy audits. School water, put money in there, but hold it in abeyance and notify the school systems if there's any interest. If there's no interest, just put that aside, make that same way with the charging stations, notify the city that we need to know what their interest is intent is. And are they willing to continue that as far as an expansion? We didn't really talk about it, but we've got the scholarship issue, and I know there's some questions, and I know Dawn's working on the landscape up at Tanglewood, and maybe if John would take it on, maybe in the next few months, kind of look at this whole scholarship issue and come back with the board and kind of see any recommendations, but keep that money in there as a placeholder. In terms of, there's a pretty sizable amount budgeted for board training, and I think we probably could reduce that maybe down to about 2,500. It's currently at 17.5, I think. We got the board legal position that we've talked about, and in terms of kind of looking at some areas and maybe reduce that area down to the same area that the board compensation is, about 200 a month in fringe for the first quarter. Look at the telecom position, which is 1, the IT positions, which are 2. And I know there's been discussion in previous years about maybe going to some type of position, whether it be part-time or contract or whatever, for some type of policy analyst to report both to the general manager and the board, to be looking at some other long-term issues and perhaps reduce the need for consultants in the future. And then basically what Steve brought up, take a look at providing the revenue to Adam from water for the expense of up there at Tanglewood, moving the dishes and the tower and that, and the cost there. Those were kind of some notes and takeaways I've got from just whatever. Does anybody else have anything else to kind of include in that? Like, we're not voting on anything today. This is just kind of a first round of kind of a mock-up of what it might look like to discuss.
The adjustment that David mentioned about the emergency plan and the shift there he's going to need for those funds.
Yeah, there was two different items.
Make sure we cover that for next year. No, that's all I had. Steve?
Yeah, I had a completely different question that I had. I'd like to know what we get from the affirmative action money that we spend. What do we get from it? How do we use it? And I'd also like to know the demographics of by department and by managerial level, organizational level of the demographics.
And is that doable to get by the board meeting?
See, they do those every so often, and we have the report from the previous.
I'm not really talking about the report. I'm asking what is the purpose? What do you tangibly and literally use the report to do? And then on the other side, the product side of is show me the demographics of FPB by department and then also by organizational level, meaning, and I don't know the lack of a better word, the people that are on the ground working, their supervisors, the division directors, the management staff, and that.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
We can.
Was that Diane's area?
It is, and we'll get all that together. I think we can pull it together.
Okay. Dawn? Okay. Then if I could, I think,
We can go to special closed session.
yeah, have you got the,
I do.
I guess I'd like to call for a motion to conduct a closed session pursuant to KRS 61.8101B for deliberations regarding the sale of real property. The reason for privacy is because the publicity at this deliberation stage might likely affect the value of the property. And I'd like to get a motion, if I could, and a second to go into closed session.
So moved.
Second.
Without objection, we're going into closed session. And this motion to come out of closed session, so moved. Do I have a second? Any discussion? We're back in open session. Do I have a motion to adjourn? So moved. Second. Any discussion?